Welcome to session 51 of our weekly recurring event series where we interview experts in tech to give you insight into what the roles are like, to give you insight into what it takes to transition into a career in tech, because it is a sector that's continuing to grow tremendously, and there's a huge talent shortage in tech right now. Some people think it's only for technical roles like coding. That is also true, but there are a ton of roles in tech. More than 50% of jobs require zero coding skills, from sales, marketing, operations, you name it. And there's a talent shortage there as well. So you don't have to learn how to code to get into tech. And if you're interested and have the passion and motivation to do it, you can absolutely do it. So many of our students have already made the transition. Today's conversation with Jasmine Shockness is specifically around how to break into partnership roles at companies like NBC, Viacom, and of course, Twitter, where Jasmine is right now, and global content partnerships role. And so that's what the conversation is going to be focused on today. Just to set a quick agenda for our call or Zoom today, of course, this is a quick introduction. We'll stop talking in a few minutes. We promise. We want to hear from Jasmine, but then we're going to have a quick introduction from Jasmine, and we're going to hear about her story about how she transitioned into tech from a PR role. And then, of course, today's conversation will be focused on how to get into these types of roles. I guess maybe one general way to put them is their business development roles, right? You're building partnerships. There's all sorts of flavors of that. We're going to talk about that today. And again, the Q&A session is facilitated throughout the entire event.
Alrighty, folks. And then we do want to remind folks that are new to School16, if you're just finding out about it and you are interested in getting into tech, we'd encourage you to explore our programs. We have actually our next cohort. We have a couple members of our next cohort here in the room today that is kicking off next Monday. Applications are essentially closed for the cohort that's starting on Monday. We may have one or two more seats, but we encourage you to apply regardless, because we are doing rolling applications with another cohort coming up in January. And this is for our Tech Career Acceleration program that teaches skills across sales, marketing, operations, and product management. If you want to go dive deeper into these roles and learn from amazing professionals, some of the ones that are listed here on this page include our instructors and our mentors from the team. And we're happy to connect you with our former students as well, some of whom are here on this call if you'd like to learn a little bit more about that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here now so that we can hear from Jasmine. Jasmine, thank you so much for spending the time with us today and joining us. We're so excited and lucky to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, share my story, answer questions. Thank you all for reaching out. This is a great opportunity.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. So just to start off, I know from our conversation a couple of weeks ago, Jasmine, that tech was not necessarily always on your radar as far as a career goes. And so we're going to talk about how you transitioned into it in a few minutes here, but I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about the early part of your career, how you made the choices that you did in terms of what opportunities you decided to pursue and how you landed that first role. Tell us a little bit more about how you thought about that before you had that exposure into tech.
Yeah, so I'm a person who very much I'm a planner. I like to know what I'm doing. I like to plan it all. And I knew very early on that I wanted to be in business. And I know I love and have a passion for entertainment. So that's what really drove me. I didn't want to necessarily be in front of the screen or anything like that, but I saw a great opportunity behind the scenes. So driving revenue in that capacity. So with that in mind, I applied to a lot of colleges that had programs within sports management or entertainment, because I saw that as a way to the business aspect and bringing that into something I'm passionate about, which is entertainment as a whole in sports. And how I really got my foot in the door was through internship. I was very fortunate enough to be accepted into the prestigious T. Howard Foundation, which looks to diversify and cultivate media and tech. So I applied, I earned an internship through at NBC Universal within the content distribution group. And that was my first foot in the door. So I always joke and say that I started within distribution or partnerships at infancy through internships. I was very much naive in regards to I didn't even know that world of distribution existed. I didn't know that I like to call it now the secret sexy side, because it drives a lot of revenue. So I got my foot in the door through there, and I was working on a lot of like the partnerships that NBC Universal did with the likes of Comcast, Verizon, Spectrum, the list goes on. I kept in touch with a lot of those folks and continued. After graduation, I received a job at NBC Universal within the same content distribution department. And that really kicked things off, giving me more opportunities throughout the entertainment sector of the business.
I really like how you used your initial interest, general interest in entertainment to guide where you were going to work. You know, you weren't necessarily going to, like you said, you're not going to necessarily be in front of the camera, but the behind the scenes working for organizations that that work in the sector that provide that as a service or as a product. So, and that's something that we always recommend for people that are trying to break in a new industry or break into a new role. There's obviously so many different companies, jobs, titles, you may not know where to start, but a good place to start is, what are you personally curious about? Where do you personal interests and passions go? And then that can guide what you decide to choose. And so, but I'm curious, you know, you got into this role at NBC, obviously great logo and a great job to have out of college to kind of help pave or at least jumpstart your career. But I think partnerships in general, you know, especially for somebody that's a recent grad or just graduated, it can seem kind of amorphous. It can mean so many different things. What was the nature of that job, and how did you learn how to do partnerships, so to speak?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I feel like this is probably a answer that may not help, but it kind of like through just a lot of like talking to a ton of people kind of like fell in my lap per se. I started off in at NBC Universal doing strategic partnerships and PR. So I was working on two teams. I feel like the PR side really helped me understand holistically what was happening in the business. I would say that would be my super one tip is continue to read what's going on in the trades within a lot of these companies. There's just so much going on an everyday basis. And I joined NBC Universal when Netflix was not necessarily a competitor. They were working, they were like, okay, you're gonna take these dusty videos that we have and put it on some website and give us a ton of money. Sure, why not? And then slowly started to become something completely different that NBC or a lot of these other programmers didn't expect. But then so from there, I moved on to Viacom, where I worked within content distribution, but within marketing. So working with a lot of the content or affiliates, as we call them, or content providers, so that when Viacom channels were on those affiliates, we were working in ways for promotion to drive whether it's linear views, VOD was really big at that time, and DVR and all that stuff, but also various promotions to upgrade their customers to various cable packages or what have you. I think through a lot of the net connections that I made within Viacom and just a lot of conversations, and honestly, like kind of my personality was I'm very much an extrovert, if you can't tell. It allowed me to move into partnerships through just like talking to people and telling them what I wanted to do more of. And I like the fact that I was able to talk to a lot of these partners directly, find out what issues they may be having, and really try to solve that through what resources that Viacom had. So whether that was data on their customers, or if it was cord cutting was an issue, what can we do to incentivize your customers to continue to stay customers of your affiliate, of your company. So I think it wasn't necessarily like a very strategic move on my part by any means, but I think I've been really big on surrounding myself with people, not necessarily that can help me, but can maybe help clarify some visions that I may have for myself, or put a name or label on it, and help guide me. Very big on mentorship and sponsorship. And that's honestly what helped me like navigate into where I am now.
Sorry about that. We had a little bit of a connection issue, but I think we caught most of what you said there. And I think one key thing that you said was, surrounding yourself with the people that can help you, can guide you along the way. Can you talk a little bit about how you did that? Because I think, conceptually it's kind of easy to understand, but practically speaking, how do you surround yourself with those types of people? How do you actually activate them to help you out when you need it?
Yeah, something that I've done really early on in my career, and I continue to do now, is I like to say stalk people, but LinkedIn is a massive resource that has been extremely helpful for me. Even before, to enter into Twitter, I saw a person who had a role that was something I aspired to be, head of entertainment and news partnerships. And I was like, I'm just going to reach out to say like, hey, would love to connect. Or actually we had a mutual contact, and I went through that person to kind of like vouch for me, if you will. And throughout my career, I have found that to be successful. And I think more than anything, I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking you to push my job application. I'm not asking for anything of that sort. I'm really just looking to understand like your path and how you got there. And that has been really helpful for me. People are very open to talk about themselves, and not necessarily give something to someone that they don't even know. So that has been extremely helpful in just like building that network, but also like not just connecting with someone for that one period of time, but continuing to keep them updated on what's going on in my career. I have this thing called like a Jasmine newsletter where I like once a year or even like twice a year, I'll update the folks within my network of like what I've been doing professionally, what have I accomplished, what projects have I worked on. And that type of thing is kind of like people are kind of keeping your resume at hand. And I have like a little distribution list, and it's just been helpful so that they see, and I think has been really influential in how people connect me with like, hey, like you might be great for this, or I see that you did this. Can you tell me more? So I'm not necessarily asking anyone for anything, but I just want to sit and learn. I think it's really important throughout your career, regardless of how much experience you may have, always being a student and willing to learn new things, because especially in this industry, it's ever changing.
I love the idea of a newsletter and updating these folks. And I think it's a good cadence where you do it once or twice a year. You're not like bugging them all the time, but also it's like, oh yeah, I haven't heard from Jasmine in a while. Let's see what she's up to. I think that's really cool. And it's a good way to maintain long-term relationships. That a lot of people ask us, well, how often should I check in with people? And am I doing individual outreach and the like all the time? But this is a great way to do it. I like that solution. That said, you mentioned that you don't necessarily ask for anything specific, but do you kind of go for the ask for the, like, for example, you went through your contact to get introduced to this other person you wanted to get in touch with, who you wanted to emulate their career. So I guess that was an ask, probably a relatively easy one since it was a personal contact. But are there periods of time where you do go for that ask? And if so, how are you making sure that you're tactful about it? Or is it more organic and people kind of implicitly maybe offer to help you once they understand what journey you're trying to follow?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that when you are reaching out to anyone, you have to be very, I don't want to say like, because we're forever changing, but you do have to be very sure of yourself. I have this thing where 3 is like my favorite number. So I put things in categories. So I categorize myself. I'm like, I want people to know these 3 things about me as soon as they meet me. So my like spiel, if you will, or my mission is like, I'm a self-proclaimed pop culture junkie. And my goal throughout my career is to really shift viewership culture through accessibility, engagement, and interactivity. So immediately they may not know my whole entire resume upon meeting me, but like if they know that statement, they are able to then connect me with various opportunities, or at least have a broad understanding of what I do, or what I'm looking to achieve throughout my career. And that has been really helpful. So like those 3 things, interconnectivity, as well as accessibility and engagement overall, like those are those 3 buckets. And through my career, just like being very sure of like, I don't want to be too mumble jumble where they're not really sure what exactly I'm looking for. So being very direct, but I also try not to, while I have that mission, I share that, I'm not necessarily asking for something directly like during that initial meeting or something like that. So I feel as though it comes off just disingenuous.
I really like that you have this like really deliberate way of communicating what you're trying to accomplish and sort of the vision behind everything that you do. And I actually have your LinkedIn in front of me, and I can see in the last sentence, she's passionate about the interconnectivity between content and technology, influencing viewership habits, experience through strategic partnerships across verticals, et cetera. And of course, there's a lot of logos there, which create a lot of credibility as well. But there you go. Your story is consistent throughout. You just said it now. You do it in your newsletters, it looks like, and you have it in your About Us. And you created this narrative about yourself. And folks that are listening, your narrative is going to be different. It can change over time as your passions and interests change. But being able to communicate that clear story about yourself and what you care about, whatever it is really important to connect the dots with people.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
that being said, I know it wasn't always as clear in your mind. And in particular, I think, you spent like 5 or 6 years at Viacom and you started thinking about making a change at that point. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to get into tech? And then I have some follow-ups about, how you figured out how to position yourself. But why did you decide tech, and how did you figure out what you're going to target within tech?
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this as I prepared for like our conversation, and a little bit of this is slightly different than what you all may share with a lot of your students. But to be honest, I've never saw tech as something that was a massive hurdle that I couldn't get into or break into. I didn't see it as I was like, oh, I'm working in traditional cable. I will never be able to break into tech unless I know someone or anything like that. I saw it as I have these skills. I know that they're transferable. While I have not worked at like a Google, I'm still more than capable to work at a Twitter or Netflix or what have you. I didn't see it just because a lot of these companies were deemed tech that I had to have some special certification. Granted, like I'm in business versus like a more technical role, and I totally understand that, but I never saw it as like a barrier of entry because I didn't have different logos on my resume. I really saw it as, here's my experience, and I've worked with a T-Mobile before. I've worked with a Netflix. So I understand your business and I'm able to break into that. And here are my skill sets. I'm able to model. I'm able to present really well. I'm able to tell a story through quantitative data. So being able to understand, like, I think it's very, I think it's good to be confident in your skill set and what you bring to the table, regardless of what's on your resume, and not making it seem like tech is on a different island that is so hard to enter.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I actually also agree with you that, there's no like single magical certification that you get that people are going to look at and be like, oh yeah, I want to hire her. It's really more about the story that you tell, how you communicate your value and the skills. And I'm curious because I know that you did that legwork up front when you were deciding to transition into tech. And I guess for you, it didn't seem like that much of a transition, but at least to go for those types of brands versus, let's say, the traditional media brands that you've been a part of before. It was kind of a work in progress to learn from others and figure out how to position yourself. And so I'm curious, talk a little bit more about how you were able to, the type of people that you learned from, and then how you decided how you were going to position and present yourself once you did start to approach these companies, because I think there's a lot of different ways you can present your background. And I'm curious how you made those decisions as you got that advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of my story that I haven't touched on yet was the fact that I was laid off from Viacom. I was laid off from Viacom shortly after the merger with CBS, and now Viacom CBS. I worked at Viacom for 6.5 years. And while I was actively like looking at different opportunities while at Viacom, it didn't necessarily like kick off, but I gained so much experience at Viacom. And why I think that being laid off was such a massive part of my story. I was laid off right before the pandemic. Then everything stopped. There was a hiring freeze. It was just like crickets in my inbox. So I was like, okay, while a lot of people may see that as like a daunting task, there's we see on LinkedIn, there's people being laid off still now based on different things. I saw it as an opportunity to really clearly identify my brand and that narrative. Like, I take it as a massive compliment that you're like, wow, like you're so direct. Like, that is all part of the work that I did to get to this point. Like, who is Jasmine Shockness? Like, I actively thought about that, what I wanted people to take away from every time they spoke to me about who I am as a person in my career. And a big part of that, I listen to a ton of podcasts, and one of the podcasts that I really enjoy that talks a lot about women in business is Skim from the Couch by The Skim. And one of their one of the people that was on their podcast talked about the importance of, like, what is your business card with just your name and no title, no company aside that. So even if you didn't know, Jasmine works at Twitter, and I'm very much, I think that time of being laid off also helped me not identify with the company or logo that's on my resume. I, like, regardless of what company I'm working for, I work for Jasmine Shockness, and that's my brand. And these are the three things that you're going to take away from getting to work with me. So I took that time to change my resume, work on my pitch, very like taking things back to elementary and practicing my presentation skills in the mirror of my bathroom. But all that was like super important for me to get here. And it's super exciting because and I didn't let that time to, like, I didn't wallow in that. I was taking classes on LinkedIn or Coursera, making sure that I was keeping my skills fresh. I took negotiating classes at Yale. Like, was really important for me to continue to work a 9 to 5, but I was working for me. And I honestly think that was such a massive, I think it really like set me apart, because I feel like, especially in times like what we've been going through as the globe, we're in a pandemic, it really is so easy to get in that mind shift of being like so negative. And it really does, it may sound corny, but everything really just starts in the mind. What you say, what you repeat, your thoughts become your words, and that later becomes action. So I knew, I just trusted so hard that I was going to land the right job for me, regardless if it was in tech or not. But I'm going to continue to grow my skills. I'm not going to be, dusty in regards to like my dealing with partners, continuing to stay in contact with my network of people, continuing to update folks of what I'm doing. And I had that time to really invest in me.
Yeah, that's so awesome that you did that. You weren't just waiting for opportunities, and honestly, you weren't just sitting there applying to things. You were actually trying to improve your skill set, which in turn gives you something to talk about when you do get into that interview. So then, I'm curious though, a couple questions here, but I guess my first one is, how did you start getting those opportunities? Was it mostly through your network, or you did something else to be able to start generate conversations with companies that you wanted to be a part of during that layoff?
So during the time, especially when it was that hiring freeze, part of me, the silver lining of the fact that we weren't in person was that people were kind of eager for human connection, because we were all siloed and with our families. So it was very easy, especially being in New York, where everyone's super busy and it takes like 5 weeks to get coffee on the calendar with someone. I was able to like, hey, let's go on Google Hangout and connect for 30 minutes. And people were so open to that. So even during that hiring freeze, again, I was working in that 9 to 5 for me. I was just telling people what I've done in the past. I was working on my brand and my narrative, and like constantly sharing that. And when things started opening up, a lot of the jobs that were coming my way were actually through my network, and that new network that I had established through that hiring freeze time. So it was like, hey, we don't have anything right now, but like, I want to keep you, posted. And I would kind of like, follow up like, oh, like I saw this is happening in the news. I saw this happen with your company or something like that. And not in an annoying way, but truly genuine. So a lot of those jobs came from my network.
So you would reach out to people that you had these, chats with and Google Hangout meetings with, where I'm assuming you kind of just asked them questions about their roles and what they did. Was that the nature of those conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. And learning about like what, even if they weren't hiring, but like what do they look for within roles on their team in regards to like skill set or experience, and work on that as well. Reading a lot of job descriptions that I wanted to have one day, I thought was really important, in incorporating those, like understanding how to really like frame that resume and frame a lot of my conversation. I will also say something that it wasn't a person that helped me, but YouTube is a massive resource that a lot of items are free. And that's what, especially with interviewing for tech companies, they interview in a completely different way than any other company that I've ever interviewed with. And through one of the companies I was interviewing with, I learned about the STAR method, which may sound very like, how did you not know that before? But with every interview I've ever been on prior to that, I had never even heard of this. And it completely changed the way in which I went about articulating my experience. And so being very structured in that way, and that's something that I even take away from now when I present my various presentations to internally or externally.
And for folks who haven't heard about that, quick Google tells us it's the method is basically talking about a specific situation, task, action, and result when you're talking about your background. And another important takeaway from me here, Jasmine, is that, you know, a lot of people think that if you maybe add the little badge to your LinkedIn that says open to work, or make a LinkedIn post about the fact that you're looking for a job or something, that's enough. But it really isn't, because you're kind of hoping that someone sees it that's relevant, that already knows about your background, or clicks on your LinkedIn profile and reads more about you. Instead, doing what you did, which is having these one-on-one conversations, really talking about your story and narrative, and then having them then remember, once they see opportunities, that, oh, hey, I talked to this awesome person named Jasmine, let me throw this opportunity their way, potential, and make them aware of it. That's a much better use of your time. And you're also, it's a personal approach, right? You're not just kind of announcing something to the world on LinkedIn. You're actually connecting with people one-on-one, which is usually, it's more work, but it's also a lot more effective, and you're building your network throughout. I'm curious, because you mentioned, I do want to talk about a little bit more about the interview process and how that was different in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, you mentioned a few times that you were, you know, updating your resume and making sure that it's relevant and fresh, and probably makes more sense, I'm assuming, for, let's say, tech roles. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What did you do to update your resume, aside from just, you know, adding information about the work that you've done? Did you make it a little bit more tech oriented? Who did you get feedback from to know if you're on the right track in terms of these updates and the like?
Yeah, so I would say that I was very encouraged, like when I was at Viacom interviewing various folks, especially maybe people who would be reporting into me, I saw that people who were just getting out of college, their resume looked completely different than people that I had graduated with. Whether it had color, just, or overall design, I knew I wanted to make it inviting. So a big part of business writing is white space and not having like too much clutter. You want to draw people in when you have any, whether it's a deal memo, if it's a email, or your resume. People don't have a lot of time, and we know on average that recruiters read your resume. I think it's like less than 10 seconds or something of that sort, I think the average is. So knowing that, I wanted to make my resume as inviting as possible. And I was really encouraged by the people who were younger than me, who were taking a lot of design courses. So I just revamped my resume. So it was still like in PDF, and I created it in Word and stuff of that sort. But what I made sure was, like, if you only had like 5 seconds to look at my resume, I had a box that was like my key experience that really condensed all of my experience throughout my almost 10 years of working, whether it was deals that I worked on, how much revenue I brought in through the various deals I've worked on, which is very important. You have to quantify your experience. And especially if you work in partnerships, any sort of dollar sign helps. As well as awards that I've won, any sort of networking groups that I'm a part of, or any courses that I've taken that was really relevant. And And so I did deals, overall partnership experience. Like I made sure that was like the key. And then under that was just like my experience in chronological order. Again, one page, but I think that that box that was in color that had like, I think it's navy blue and white font. I made sure that that was like the key that people were taking away, because at the end of the day, people are not reading line by line, everything is your resume. So I saw like, just knowing like we're all human, like that's going to attract people right away. So you're going to see my name big and bold, and then you're going to see this box that has like the key experience. And I actually received a ton of really great feedback from a lot of people saying that like this was one of the best resumes that they saw. So I received, again, I said I was very much influenced by people who were younger than me, and also like Google. So I'm never afraid, like I always like to look at various resources that are readily available, and be encouraged to like change.
That's fantastic. And I think an important thing to note here, formatting matters, making sure it's digestible matters. Oftentimes when people are reading a resume, they're actually just looking for the few things that'll disqualify someone, right? And that's why they're not reading it point by point. Like if there's a spelling mistake, or you can tell the person's just not a good communicator or didn't even think about it, that's really important to consider. So that's great. So obviously you had a great resume that was probably working in terms of opening up some opportunities for you, but let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how that interview process was a little bit different. And by the way, folks, a quick reminder, we have about 20-25 minutes left here with Jasmine. So if you have questions that are top of mind, you can start dropping them into the chat now. But can you talk about that experience at Twitter specifically? And maybe if we could take a step back, unless you already mentioned it, I missed it. You know, how did the opportunity come about? And then what was that interview process like at the various stages? And I guess specifically, what was so different about it than maybe your experience at Viacom or some of the other interviews you went through?
Yeah. So I did a lot of interviews. I interviewed a ton with a lot of I would say majority of the companies that I interviewed with were all in tech. Some were not, but I used what I deem like the tech interview format for across all of my interviews. And I received a lot of glowing remarks, so much that I was able to select like where I went through to next, which was really awesome. So I'd say that what would make it different. So again, it's a lot of like providing those examples. So it's not necessarily like, I think the most important question that people fail to answer, and I failed the first time I was asked this, was, so tell me about yourself. Usually that's the first answer a lot of hiring managers or people who are on interview panels ask, and it is easily the one question that can get you disqualified from moving forward. I remember on this one particular interview, I was pretty sure I had this, like I went through the interview panels, I had it in the bag. And so I was just interviewing with like the head of the department. So it was a pretty senior person. And she had shared in the beginning, like, I heard great things about you and your experience, so on and so forth. So tell me about yourself. And for whatever reason, I was not expecting that question. I thought, I was very like, okay, like tell me about a time when, sort of thing. But tell me about yourself is so like blanketed. And I remember feeling, and I'm sharing this vulnerably, but I was like, well, I grew up in Long Island and I did this, and it was just like not related at all. And bombing that interview is what drove me to now create that narrative of like, who is Jasmine? Here are my top 3. This is what I want, sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, people are like, yes, people want to eventually get to know you and where you grew up and like what sports you played, but like they really want to know like professional. So like that was that mission statement from that bomb interview. I created my mission statement of like who Jasmine Shockness is. And I think that was really important. From there also, as I mentioned, a lot of interviews are very much like, tell me about a time when. So that's when you would insert the STAR method there. So tell me, I interviewed with Amazon. So they're very much that way, and how they ask a lot of questions. So would give the situation, talk about the task overall that was needed to be done, then the actions in which I specifically took to solve that, the situation, and then the end results. So again, I mentioned at the top of the call, quantifying your results in any sort of way, making sure that people, like, there's some sort of, or what am I saying? There's overall, like, people are able to measure that success for you, and you're providing that data for them numerically, especially with working in partnerships. You're always looking at numbers. So it's also helpful to put that in respect to your career.
Can you give us a preview of what that tell me about your self-answer was? I'm sure you won't give us the whole thing, but how did you kind of design that talk track? How did you talk about yourself at that point?
And how long is it? Like, is it a few minutes? Because you don't want to, also people do check out after a certain point.
Absolutely. I think so. I actually have it here. So I was like, let me just have this just in case. So I'd say it's about, like, I'm not going to bore you all with like the exact answer, but so I said I like to describe myself in 3 buckets. So one, I'm a connector, and that has inevitably supported my love for contracts and negotiating and partnerships. And then I would lead on to say, like, how exactly that, working with legal, working with finance, how that all has helped me be connector. Again, being within my personality and my passion, how that all drives to how I could work cross-functionally, internally, as well as communicate clearly to external stakeholders. 2, I'm a self-proclaimed pop culture junkie, which is what I shared at the top of this call. And then 3, my goal in my career is to do X. So again, having that, like, top 3 of, like, who I am and what I want you to take away, I would say my most powerful top 3 is that very first one that I shared, is that I'm a connector. Because people sometimes don't realize that partnerships, and I believe this, partnerships do not close relationships do not close deals. But your ability to work cross-functionally, read legal contracts, be able to create a model, work with sales finance, tell a story is so important. So by labeling myself as a connector, each one of my top 3 starts with I am. So that's what I want you to take away from me. I would say in total was probably like a minute and a half. I really condensed it and got it down so I'm not losing people's attention, and making sure that I'm really speaking to, like, the job description overall.
And then that's awesome. I love that. It's very structured, but you're not just saying I'm a connector, you're then backing it up with what you've done, the results, what you've been a part of. And that's actually something really important that I think a lot of people miss. Oftentimes people ask them about an example of a situation that they've been in at work, and they start talking about from the perspective of the team, whereas what they really want to hear is what your contribution was to that particular problem or project. And so I think that's so important. And I'm curious then also, how did you position your previous partnerships and content experience to be suitable for the role that you ended up getting, which was at Twitter? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think, so really, to me, a lot of it was, there's so much going on. I think that, one, I feel very fortunate to be at Twitter, especially at this time. There's a lot of exciting things. We've been in the news quite a bit. But also just the fact that, like, content, when I was interviewing, or just in general, like, I'm very passionate about entertainment, and content overall, like, skyrocketed, especially during quarantine time, because everyone was trying to occupy their time. So just continuing to keep updated on what was going on and how a lot of the programmers or streamers in general were impacting culture overall was very important to me. In regards to how positioning my experience directly, I would relate it to that. In regards to cord cutting, to binge watching, like, having a lot, I'm one of those people, I do remember, like, very important stats and numbers and stuff like that. And I think it really does help to provide that context, along with, like, the passion and projects that I've worked on.
That's great. And I can already feel like if I was the hiring manager talking to you, I'm really hearing an expert here that has a ton of experience they can bring to the table, probably knows, as a domain expert, knows more than me and can help set some direction on these content decisions. And that's a true asset now for me too. And if you're pulling out numbers, you're just backing up that you know what you're talking about, but also because you actually like this stuff, clearly, it's top of mind for you all the time. And so you're able to come in and say, well, here's what I think too, and that will inform how you do your job, I'm sure, which sounds impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having an opinion on what's going on in the industry, I think is very important. People just don't want to hire you just because you can do the job, but they also want to see like that you have a passion. Within my first few weeks of working at Twitter, my boss was just like, I could tell that you actually love this stuff, and it's hard to actually teach. And that is true. Like you cannot teach passion. You can't teach any of that. Like I remember there was one time where someone was talking about an interview. They were interviewing someone for a job at Viacom, and the candidate had said they're not big on watching TV. Why? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And not to say that you have to be a big film buff or anything like that sort, but like you have to have a passion for something and show that when you're interviewing.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's, if you try to fake it, people will know. I've done it myself, back when I worked in finance, going after investment banking jobs. I really shouldn't have been doing it because I didn't care about it. And sometimes, or equity research and things like that, it just came out in the interview. And my buddy's a VP at Discovery now, and I mean, he's been like following celebrities and following different shows and thinking about what makes a good show since he was like 9 years old, right? And that, of course, has shown throughout his career and why he's worked on a bunch of really popular shows and went into entertainment. So I think that's critical.
I do want to add that, for some people, obviously, it takes a little bit longer to find their passion and what they're curious about. But what you said, Jasmine, I think is so important is you have to have an opinion. Come up with an opinion. If you're going to go apply, let's say you always wanted to work for a social media company, and you're going to start applying to different social media companies, come up with an opinion of why you think that company does things better, why you like the way they present content better, why you think they connect people better. All these things are going to be important. It's going to come off in those conversations. And I'm curious, and I do want to spend a few minutes learning a little bit more about your role. But before I ask you about that, I'm curious, now that you're in the position that you're at, if you were, I'm sure you do hiring, and if you were looking at candidates and talking to candidates who are either a little bit more junior or getting into tech, starting off their careers, maybe don't have that quite as much experience, what would you look for? What would make you convinced that you should take a chance on a particular person? How can they come off to you when wanting to work for your team that would convince you to take a chance?
And maybe if you have a specific example, maybe that's an easier way of someone that you hired or recently came across.
Yeah, I would say a lot of company information is public. Listen to earnings calls, listen to those investor relations calls, have an opinion about what the goals are for that company that you're interviewing. I know it sounds boring, but if you're going to be interviewing for said company and you can't even listen to the earnings call, like it doesn't, and again, it doesn't, like a lot, especially in tech, so much happens when you, like in regards to what the engineering team is doing that's going to impact this app. Again, that impacts like active users on the app. How do you use said app? I talked about this during my interviews with Twitter. I said, like, I use Twitter to talk about housewives on Bravo. I'm a big fan. And also I love talking, like spreading inspiration. So follow me and all that jazz on Twitter. But in all seriousness, I think it's important to show like the different ways in which users are using these platforms. It's different for everyone. And I didn't shy away from talking about the fact that I love Bravo Housewives. Like still to this day, like I'll tweet about Housewives because it's important to show the community that's cultivating on these various platforms. I talk about the use of TikTok as well. How do I use it? It may be different. Like I don't use it for necessarily dance moves, but I use it to learn a lot about like career moves, a lifestyle as well. And one thing I will say is that I see a lot in general, there's a lot of conversation about people wanting to move into tech specifically for salary. Same thing is like, you don't have a passion for it, you will soon hate it. Like that paycheck will maybe be great, but if you don't enjoy what you are doing but the slightest bit, like it will drain you because it is a lot of work. So I definitely want to point that out because I see a lot of TikToks about like how I made XYZ salary just making in tech, and a lot of those people hate their jobs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, well, first of all, it'll be much harder to even get your foot in the door if you're just looking for a paycheck. And
Absolutely.
obviously, we all want to get paid. Of course, we all want to get paid, and we're thinking about that when we're going into jobs and industries. But that's not how you communicate value to an organization. That's not how you set up and design your career, right? There's a lot of ways you can make money. And in tech, there's so many different types of jobs and opportunities and verticals and industries. Tech is kind of ever present in everything that we do, that you really need to have a focus before you decide to prioritize the paycheck. You need to prioritize, where am I going to be of value and where can I see myself develop as an individual? So I think you're absolutely right, especially for some junior folks that are entering their career. Showing the passion for the product and then understanding the product is really, really important.
Yeah.
Of course. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about, as much as you can talk about it, what your role really means at a company like Twitter. If you can tell us a little bit about what your deliverables are, what you need to achieve and be good at your job on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis, and give us a little understanding of kind of the day-to-day, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, so I'm part of the revenue driving arm within the Global Content Partnerships group. So within that department, if you will, I work within content business development. So within my role, I source, measure, and negotiate content deals that implement either new partners and publishers. So ironically enough, Viacom CBS is my client. So I help bring content from various publishers onto the Twitter feed. So how we drive revenue is through bringing content like clips, and then we do sponsorship opportunities and sponsorship sales. So I don't necessarily work on that, but also through pre-roll. So inserting advertising ahead of the clips. And again, we would split that in a rev share. So again, I know how I love Twitter because of the fact that any cultural moment or just in general, anything you may even be thinking, someone's also thinking it on Twitter. And it's a way, again, to really build community. People are constantly talking about various things. You can learn so much on the platform. But I really love that it cultivates community. And it does that especially through a lot of content. So live content deals, NBA, NFL, through again, I talk about Housewives, so working with the NBC to get clips of that sort and do sponsorship opportunities there. So that's what I do at Twitter.
So as part of your job, let's say reaching out to, I don't know, the ad people at the NBA and figuring out how you can partner with them? Like how does it practically work to initiate and cultivate a relationship with an organization, let's say like the NBA, to have a partnership?
So it's actually slightly different. So it's very similar to, again, what I did at Viacom, but on the opposite side, where Viacom is a programmer and Twitter is a platform. I now work for the platform and I work with Viacom, who's a programmer. So we work on multi-year distribution deals, if you will. So again, that's why I never saw tech as like this barrier, because I said, I could do that. I could, I'm just doing it on the other side. So essentially it's really just negotiating deals, contracts, and it'll be multi-year deals. And there's usually, whether it's a MG or a total revenue that is associated with each of these deals.
Got it. That's really interesting. Thank you for clarifying that. So we have a question here from Sophie, saying that she's learning a ton from you, taking tons of notes. Awesome, Sophie, glad to hear that. She's asking, what are some of your favorite or helpful questions to ask when you're in interviews? And inevitably, when the question comes up, do you have any questions for me? What kind of things do you like to ask?
Let me look at my, so I change that for every single interview. I would ask about there'll be a couple of things. Ask about the team structure, what you'll be working on and so on, but also, again, knowing that you'll do your research, have an opinion on whether it is a new deal that was recently executed and hit the press, have an opinion on that. So for instance, I saw that at the XYZ Newfront that you all had talked about this new partnership with Billboard. How does your team impact the revenue that will be coming in through this? So I think being very specific and showing that not only that shows your interest, right? That shows that you did your homework. It shows your passion. It shows that you've come prepared. And a lot of times, it's crazy enough. I was just talking to a person who's pretty senior at my company, and she had shared that it's surprising how many people do not do research while going into an interview. People lose it right from there. So a lot of things are on a silver platter for you if you just take the time. What I do every morning is I take 30 minutes and I read what's going on in the press, what's going on with my competitors, with our clients, just in general. And I got that a lot from my very first job working at NBC, where it was my job to clip all the things that were happening in the trades the day before, so that everyone in my department would know how it's impacting our industry as a whole.
Got it. Thank you. That's great. I love that. That is a great opportunity. Whenever that question comes up, it's a great opportunity to show true curiosity and understanding of what the team does. So I like how you frame that. Myra is asking if you suggest taking any kind of certificates, for example, perhaps a PM or a CSM certification, anything that you feel like is a must-have, especially when somebody's trying to break in to a new career like in tech?
So I want to be clear. I know there's so many different avenues in tech, so I can't speak for them all. I think that for me specifically, when it came to very much like the business of partnerships, taking financial modeling courses, negotiating courses. I'm in a course actually tomorrow with a professor from Stanford in regards to like what are tactics that you can take to continue to negotiate in an effective way. Also, I know obviously there's just so much out there. I'm just saying what works for me personally, given working in partnerships. So I don't think there's necessarily a certificate. I haven't found that in a lot of my interviews or just throughout my career that I needed any sort of credentials. A lot of it really came from curiosity from myself. So taking classes at NYU, I've done that, taking classes in communications. I'm in a business writing class right now. So continue to always be a student is really important to me. And I think it really does show in my day-to-day work.
I love that. Don't think about it as what should I do? Think about it, what skills do you want to improve and what actually interests me? And that's going to be better in terms of guiding you towards how you should prioritize this learning.
Absolutely. I will add though, I would say that if you're talking specific in tech, I would say in a lot compared to the companies that I've worked with in the past, tech is really big on business writing. So clearly being able to articulate your thoughts or various strategy clearly and concisely is very important. And I would say it's something that I'm still learning to this day, which is why I'm in a business writing class. For example, Amazon doesn't do decks. They don't have PowerPoint or Google presentations or anything of that sort. Every single idea is articulated through a doc, a deal memo that people sit in a meeting and they will read. So if you're a part of that, how are you clearly articulating ideas that isn't just in charts or, you know, various like photos? So be able to really like hone in on that skill is really important, I would say.
I love that. And so here's some homework for you guys. Google Amazon deal memo and see if you can find some examples of what Jasmine is talking about. That's a good idea. I think I'll do that too after the call. We have time for one more question. There's a question from Atia, and I want to reframe it a little bit. Atia is wondering what some of the best entry-level roles are for a non-tech role for people without experience, but I want to frame it based on maybe, let's say, at Twitter, specifically for a department like yourself, like partnership, content partnerships. That's a pretty senior role, of course. I mean, you're in a very senior role, but it seems like it's something that you would need experience for. So what kind of more junior or entry-level roles do you see at Twitter where you guys are looking at, you know, recent grads, people that don't have a ton of experience or no experience in tech? Maybe what are some of those titles?
To be honest, I don't know if those exact titles, because I feel like a lot of tech companies label them very differently. And even I will notice, like, I was a manager at Viacom, but a manager at Twitter, at Google, at Amazon, what have you, is different levels. But I will say really great resource that I learned last year is called The Blind. So you create a profile and everyone's like as anonymous or whatever, but they share various, whether it's about compensation, about interviewing process, as well as overall roles that various companies are looking for. I think that is really helpful. But also reading just in general the job description to see like the years of required. I would say they're all very different, but I wouldn't let any of that like deter you from like applying to certain positions for sure.
Yeah, 100% agree. You mentioned writing, for example, is important. If writing is an area where you're strong in, you may look into copywriting roles, you may look into social media marketing roles, for example, or content creation as an asset. There's so many different types of roles where first you need to understand what are you good at, even if you don't have a ton of experience, and then what you want to learn more of, and then that can help you narrow your search. But like Jasmine said, every company has a slightly different nomenclature for these things, and maybe even slightly different expectations for what it takes. Folks, we are now officially 1 minute past the hour, so we do appreciate all your questions, and hopefully we got through most of them. Jasmine, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through your experience and sort of showing us under the hood your tactics. I really feel like, obviously you learn from others, but I also feel like you really designed your own approach to learning and your own approach to talking about yourself that I think really resonated with people that you talked to, which is why you really took ownership over your career, which is really exciting. So I definitely learned a lot, and hopefully everybody here on this call or who's watching the recording did as well. So thank you again, Jasmine, so much for joining us here today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
And folks, we're just going to share our screen really quickly here. By the way, I did some Googling on the side here. And if you Google internal deal memo versus presentation, there's some interesting articles that come up that are pretty relevant. But we want to remind you folks that we would love your feedback about how today's session went. The survey is going to pop up once this session is over, so you can fill it out right here. But also Sergey did just drop the link into the chat, so we would appreciate your feedback.
And I can see that Myra asked if it's okay to add you on LinkedIn. Jasmine, what do you think?
Yes, add me, Jasmine Shockness. I'm the only Jasmine Shockness in the world, so.
Really? Oh, that's cool. It's such a cool name. That's awesome. And Myra, you should, when you add Jasmine, you should add a note that you met her at this event, right? This is a networking opportunity all here. So I'm glad that you asked that question. You should totally add her and follow her on Twitter and retweet, give her some more follows. That's awesome. So would really appreciate, folks, any feedback you may have for us, good or bad. We always love to hear it. We read every single piece of feedback. If you want to hear about future events, do please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and on Instagram. LinkedIn is kind of an important one because, again, it's a professional network. And if you're trying to break into tech, you will need to develop it, your profile on there. So do follow us, and we share about all the events there and on our Instagram page as well. And we do have an awesome event coming up next week as well with Katie Weidman from Pandora, who's going to be talking about marketing, a little bit of a different role, of course, at a very different company, but going to be a great person to learn from as well.
I also just want to say, Jasmine, your blazer game is really strong, folks. Look at this blue one in this picture. It's awesome. And the one you're wearing now is sweet too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate that. All righty. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Really great to see you all. And Jasmine, again, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week. Bye-bye.